Hello and welcome to Global Business live from Nairobi. I am Penina Karibe. Let's begin with a look at the markets. Nigeria's stock exchange began the week in the red. Stocks fell as the postponement of the elections created jitters amongst investors. The all share ended the day 1.61% weaker. We'll talk more about that in a bit. Coming up in the show tonight. Nigerian stocks fall as elections delay fuels uncertainty. Zimbabwe plays down planned EU sanctions. And UK MPs propose stiff regulations against Facebook to counter fake news. Now, we begin today's global business in Nigeria, where the Naira eased on the forward market on Monday and stocks fell in early trade. The one-year non-deliverable Naira forward opened at a quarter of 401 per dollar from 397 previous session. Nigeria's most liquid banking stocks eased 1.07%, while all stocks fell 1.44%. This is after the country's surprise decision to delay national elections over the weekend, just hours before polls had been due to open. The Electoral Commission said the postponement, which is due to last a week, was due solely to logistical factors. The electoral body denied political pressure had played any part in the decision. President Muhammadu Buhari and his rival, former Vice President Atiku Abubakar, both urged voters to stay calm. Still in Nigeria, and businesses in major cities are making steep losses as most Nigerians retreat to rural areas to vote in the Saturday election. Most businesses closed shop over the weekend, but the few that opened struggled to get customers. CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam has more.
As for then, we used to have like maybe 50 to 60 people coming to bar in a day. But now, we don't see that much again, maybe 10, 15 people.
Businesses counting their losses in an election season. Musa Sani runs this salon in the capital, Abuja. He says salon business normally peaks over the weekends, but this is not the case this time. Most of the people who come to Musa's salon travel to the countryside to vote, but the election day has been moved forward by a week. Nigeria's Electoral Commission says poor weather and arson attacks on their offices are the reasons why the election could not hold on Saturday. And that means more unprofitable days for businesses like Musa's.
Most of my customers, they traveled, and some of them have not returned back yet. So the business has been down, like no much customers like before.
It's the second day after the election was postponed and Abuja is still deserted, and business owners like Musa are taking the hit. Their misery should have ended this weekend, but they will have to endure more in the coming days. Kelechi Mekalam, CGTN, Abuja, Nigeria.
Now, Kelechi is closely following developments in Nigeria, and she joins us live from the capital, Abuja. Kelechi, first off, President Buhari addressed the nation today in a presser, and he essentially called the electoral body incompetent for the last-minute vote delay, and that's a big blow to the electoral body. What impact are these words by the president likely to have on the process itself, and also what other key issues did Buhari touch on in that presser?
Well, President Buhari did say that he only got the news of the postponement at about 4:30 a.m. on election day, and he was already in his country home where he had gone to cast his votes. So he blamed INEC for displaying remarkable ineptitude, that the commission had 4 years to prepare for the elections, as well as the resources available to ensure that the polls were successful, but that it failed to carry out its duties. Now, the biggest blow is that one of lack of confidence in the electoral umpire. People no longer trust that they're capable of conducting free, fair and credible elections as they're supposed to. As such, the commission would be probed after the polls and answer to questions that's been raised. Another issue the president raised was he read a riot act to those who planned snatching ballot boxes and rigging the elections. He ordered security agencies to deal, in his word, ruthlessly with them.
All right, so let's focus now on the economy, Kelechi. It's a big discussion point in this election. Nigeria just emerging from a recession, but the economy grew at just 1.8% in the quarter, according to data released in December. So regardless of whoever wins, what is going to be in his entry in regards to turning around the economy?
Well, the markets have recorded tremendous low this period. Lots of businesses had to close down over the weekend as a result of the restricted movement. The markets were shut and commercial activities actually brought to a halt. So many people had also traveled out of their traveled to their country homes to cast their votes. But businesses are just beginning to pick up as the week begins, and it's expected to build up until Saturday again. That's, of course, if the elections hold then. All right, Kelechi Mekalam, live in Abuja. Thank you. Meanwhile, in Nigeria, 4 major telecommunication companies have been fined $205,000 for breaching the laws of the Nigeria Communications Commission. The regulatory body has fined MTN Nigeria, Airtel, Glo, and 9 Mobile for authorizing activities that were unapproved by the Commission. The infractions include approval for promotions and advertisements and SIM registration in an uncontrolled environment. The violations were listed in 2018 as part of the non-compliance by the network providers. The companies are also accused of routing a minimum of 10% of interconnect traffic through exchange licensees. Now here in Kenya, banking stocks at the Nairobi Securities Exchange have gained value since the start of the year at an average of 12.56%. This is according to data from Faida Investment Bank. NIC Bank is the highest gainer following the announcement of a merger with CBA Bank. As of February the 15th, its share traded at 39.5 Kenya shillings, representing a 42% gain from the start of this year. Other counters that have gained significant value include Kenya Commercial Bank, which gained 16%, Equity at 22%, I&M Bank at 12.4%, Cooperative Bank at 8.7%, and Standard Chartered Bank 5%. Barclays Bank recorded the highest dividend yield of 8.5%, followed closely by Standard Chartered Bank at 8.3%. All listed banks, with the exception of National Bank and Housing Finance, recorded 10% above return on equity. Faida Investment Bank analysts predict that banking sector stocks will maintain the upward trend in the short term as investors wait for the 2018 earnings reports to be released in March. Onto Somalia now, and authorities in the Horn of African nation have moved to assure Kenya that it will not auction oil blocks in a disputed maritime region along the border between the two nations. The move comes after Kenya recalled its ambassador and expelled the Somalia envoy to Kenya. From Mogadishu, CGTN's Abdulaziz Bello reports.
A diplomatic standoff between Somalia and Kenya has emerged over a maritime dispute. Nairobi has accused Mogadishu of auctioning oil and gas blocks in a disputed territory in the Indian Ocean, a move Mogadishu has denied in a statement released by the Foreign Ministry. Diplomatic tension between the two countries escalated over the weekend after Kenya recalled its ambassador to Somalia and ordered the Somali top diplomat in Nairobi out of its country. Kenyan officials argue that Somalia offered several oil blocks in its territory to external bidders at a recently concluded conference in London.
The summons is a consequence of a most regretful and egregious decision by the government of Somalia to auction off oil and gas blocks in Kenya's maritime territorial area that borders Somalia. This unparalleled affront and illegal grab at the resources of Kenya will not go unanswered, and it is tantamount to an act of aggression against the people of Kenya and their resources.
Somalia has, however, moved to assure its neighbor that it will not take any unilateral activities in the region before the judgment of the court. Legal teams from both countries are now expected to avail themselves for an oral hearing at the International Court of Justice later in September. Experts now say that Kenya is worried about the possible outcome of the court case.
The latest statements coming out of Kenya reveals that Nairobi is worried about the possible outcome of the court case in The Hague. It is a preemptive move aimed at forcing Somalia to resolve the issue through dialogue and abandon the court case at the International Court of Justice.
Somali officials have also criticized the move to expel its envoy to Kenya without prior consultation. Somalia says it shares a solid bond with the East African nation.
The relationship between Somalia and Kenya is a real one, it's a solid one, and to make it clear our intention of even taking the relationship and the cooperation between the two countries to another level.
Mogadishu hopes to revive its hydrocarbon sector and is set to announce first round of bidding on offshore acreages in 206 blocks, mainly in southern Somalia, as it seeks to revive its economy. Meanwhile, opposition lawmakers have criticized the recently concluded London conference and called for transparency in the bidding process. Once the bidding is done, economists say Somalia will join ranks with oil and gas producing nations of the world. Abdulaziz Bilo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Ethiopia and Djibouti have signed a deal to build a pipeline to transport Ethiopian gas to export terminal in the Red Sea state. China's Ethiopia has extensive gas deposits that were discovered in the 1970s. China's GCL Petroleum Investments has been developing the Kalub and Hilala fields there since signing a production sharing deal with Ethiopia in 2013. The deal between Djibouti and Ethiopia comes a year after GCL signed a memorandum of understanding with Djibouti to invest $4 billion in the project. According to the Ethiopian government, production is likely to start in 2020. Africa's eastern seaboard could soon become a major global producer of liquefied natural gas based on finds made in Tanzania and Mozambique. Coming up next is a look at your corporate headlines. Kenyan betting firm SportPesa is locked in a bitter legal dispute with the country's revenue authority over $102 million in back taxes dating back 3 years ago, following demands from the taxman last year to remit disputed withholding tax from betting game winners between 2015 and 2016. The betting firm cited a 2014 court order that stopped deduction of withholding tax from winners' cash. KRA argues that it was never served with the alleged court order and not party to the suit. SportPesa says it is apprehensive that KRA might freeze its bank accounts, which could hit its business hard and also damage its reputation. South African facilities and services provider Bosasa announced that it has gone into voluntary liquidation. The firm, which has been embroiled in allegations of corruption, says it received a notification from its financial institution that it plans to distance itself from the group and close its bank accounts by the end of February. The group has applied with various financial institutions locally and internationally for a trading account, but due to reputational damage in the past few months, several say that it poses a reputational risk for them as a client. Without a trading account, Bosasa would have to cease operations by the 1st of next month. Kenya's Athi River Mining Company may soon have a new owner. According to the firm's administrators, PricewaterhouseCoopers, several companies have shown interest in acquiring the debt-laden firm. So far, 23 companies signed non-disclosure agreements giving them access to additional information on the cement manufacturer, while 14 companies issued non-binding offers to buy the firm. ARM, which has presence in Kenya, Tanzania and Rwanda, was put under administration in August last year after it failed to raise money to pay its creditors. PwC did not disclose the list of potential buyers, but Dangote Cement and Oman's Racid have previously expressed interest in ARM. And Tata Motors had announced a $4 billion loss in its Jaguar Land Rover business this month. The UK-based automaker previously blamed its financial woes mainly on challenging market conditions in China, such as reduced sales, Brexit, and a trade dispute with the US. However, analysts are pointing out that the firm is headed for a cash crash as its spending has gotten out of control despite underwhelming sales. The carmaker is currently seeking $1 billion in emergency funding, which needs to be in place within just 14 months. Shares in Tata Motors collapsed by 18% on the news. And that's your look at your corporate headlines. You're watching Global Business. Coming up after the break. Zimbabwe plays down planned EU sanctions. And new oil and gas discovery is billed as an economic game changer for South Africa.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
The government of Zimbabwe says it's not worried by the threat made by the European Union Parliament to tighten sanctions against President Emmerson Mnangagwa's led administration. The Southern African state insists that it will still stick with its all-weather friends, China and Russia. The EU had disclosed that it wasn't pleased with the developments in Zimbabwe, accusing Mnangagwa of indicating left while turning right. That's in regards to his earlier pledge to reform the state's local politics. However, Mnangagwa has pleaded with the international community to lift the sanctions, saying they were causing harm to the ordinary Zimbabweans. All right, so Farai Makutuya is our man on the ground. He joins us now live from the capital, Harare. So, Farai, the EU accusing Mnangagwa of indicating left and then turning right. What exactly is the EU unhappy with?
Well, Penina, what we've heard coming out of some of the EU member states is that they are unhappy at the pace at which President Emmerson Mnangagwa's administration has fulfilled or implemented some of the inauguration promises. When he became president in November 2017, he promised to turn a new page, to open up democratic space, to respect and uphold the rule of law, to have a credible, free and fair election. And in recent times, there have been concerns raised about that, particularly given the events of the last few weeks, where there's been this very violent, very brutal crackdown on anti-government protests. The EU thinks that perhaps that is dragging back this country to a previous unhappy and very bitter past. And so the concerns have been the president has promised certain things and said he'll do certain things, but he hasn't been fulfilling them or living up to those promises. And so that's where the concerns emanate from, the fact that perhaps he's saying things, playing to the gallery, but on the ground not fully implementing them, particularly when you look at the recent violence and the crackdown that has been witnessed here.
And now, Farai, there is a threat of sanctions on Mnangagwa's administration, but do we know what form those sanctions will take?
Well, Panina, certainly in the last few days and certainly building up to this meeting of EU foreign ministers, there has been, a feeling that given the concerns that have been raised, we might see more names being added to that sanctions list, more entities being added to that sanctions list. But as we've heard a very short while ago, there has been no major change to the sanctions regime. We know that former President Robert Mugabe and his wife remain on the list. They are the subjects of travel bans and asset freezes in the EU. Zimbabwe Defense Industries, a government and army-linked arms manufacturer, has trade embargoes imposed on it. 2 people have been removed from the list because they're no longer in government. That is the former Commissioner General of Police and former head of intelligence. And there remain suspended measures on the vice president, on the head of the Zimbabwe Defense Forces, as well as the Minister of Agriculture. So in that respect, not much has changed, but the EU has been quick to say that they will continue to monitor the situation and can quickly add more names to that list if the situation requires.
And yet, Farai, the government maintaining it is not worried by the threat of those sanctions and it still can survive. But can it really ignore Europe? Can it survive without Europe?
Well, Panina, I think on one hand there is a bit of political brinkmanship and bravado that the Harare administration is playing, obviously wanting to show that it is not perturbed and not bothered much by the threat of these impending or of more sanctions, and saying that it will rely on some of its all-weather friends. But I think that certainly it will be a cause for concern for President Emmerson Mnangagwa and his government should there be more threats imposed, because we know that the re-engagement with the international community, particularly with countries that had isolated Zimbabwe, has been a key pillar of President Emmerson Mnangagwa's administration. It's one of the things he ran with on the campaign trail, and certainly if he was to be dealt the blow of an ally, a former ally that he's trying to reach out to, if they impose more sanctions on him, I think that will certainly deal a blow to his international re-engagement and his foreign policy. So yes, Zimbabwe will try to make the best of the situation, had there be more sanctions or if more sanctions are imposed. But, I think it will certainly deal a huge blow to Zimbabwe's international re-engagement. It needs as many friends as it can get, and losing the support of the EU would be quite a significant blow.
All right, so Farai, let's focus a little bit on local politics. Former finance minister, now opposition figure, Tendai Biti, he was sentenced today to 7 days in prison. Quite interesting developments there. Tell us more about that, and also reactions there in Zimbabwe following that ruling.
Well, Panina, the case that Tendai Biti was, the charges that he faced was announcing the results of last July's election prematurely. The mandate of announcing election results lies with the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, and he was charged with announcing that opposition leader Nelson Chamisa had won the election, and so he was found guilty today by the courts. His sentence was, largely suspended, $200 or 7 days in jail. And so I think the reaction from many people here is that they're seeing the fact that there's been no custodial sentence, the fact that he won't be doing any jail time. Many people see that as a way of diffusing some of the tension that could have been potentially escalated had he been given a jail term. But it also strains the relations that exist between the ruling party and the opposition. There is talk of trying to initiate dialogue, of trying to get parties talking and negotiating, and any action, for instance, a conviction. Some of these court cases continued ramping up of political tension is seen scuttling and torpedoing those efforts. And so many people feel that, yes, he has been convicted. Yes, that may have ramifications, but more importantly, he's not going to do any jail time. It's seen as a very light sentence, which still leaves room for an opportunity for the parties to reconcile and not necessarily, to be divided.
All right, so Farai, he did pay the $200, right?
Yes, he did. He did pay the, and we're told in 5-cent bond coins. So giving the court authorities a lot of hard work in counting that money.
Thank you very much. Let's leave it there, Farai. Thank you very much. Farai Makutuya, live for us there in Harare. Now, French energy giant Total's significant gas discovery is expected to be a game changer for South Africa's lucrative oil industry and stagnant economy. The find represents around 1 billion barrels of oil equivalent and is found about 175 kilometers off the southern Cape Coast of South Africa. CGTN's Angelo Coppola tells us more.
The find and its prospects are a much-needed boost for South Africa considering the current stagnant economy.
South Africa is a net importer, significant net importer of oil and gas. We're looking at about $20 billion which South Africa spends to import oil and gas products in a year. So, of course, having indigenous South African resources to be able to fuel the South African economy is great news.
The country's legislators have made a start to enable development of the oil and gas sector.
Especially when you're looking at local content laws, we do think that South Africa needs to do more to be able to enable the environment for service companies to actually use the whole value chain of the oil and gas industry to benefit the common man in South Africa.
But not everyone's excited about the find, and that's based on the 2018 Intergovernmental Report on Climate Change released in 2018, which suggests that the world had until 2030 to act on climate change.
That means that we have to shift urgently away from fossil fuels. If we're doing that, we shouldn't be exploring for any new fossil fuels anywhere. We should be focusing on shifting away from the fossil fuels that we use currently. We believe that the risks associated with Total's find far outweigh any potential benefits.
Regardless of the potential climate change concerns, industry players want government to do more.
So what the government needs to do is certainly to simplify the regulation for the oil and gas sector to make sure that we have as many companies as possible coming in with the right kind of technology to drill and give South Africa the energy resources which it needs.
While everyone's excited about the find, it's going to be between 5 and 10 years before there's any kind of flow of either gas or oil. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
South African Airways has managed to secure about $248 million it requires to keep afloat until June this year. The state-owned entity has disclosed that negotiations are also underway with banks to roll over the firm's debt of around $651 million to the end of next month. The flag carrier is currently exploring a turnaround strategy to address its debt crisis. The South African airline is at the moment drowning in around $898.5 million of debt, and in order to implement the 3-year turnaround plan, the airline is expected to acquire a total bailout of about $1.5 billion. Now, South Africa's Reserve Bank is preparing a process of regulation for the country's cryptocurrency market. It has issued a consultative policy paper focused on the risks and benefits of cryptocurrencies in South Africa. CGTN Sumitra Naidu explains.
The crypto revolution has taken the global financial market by storm, but some are getting rich while others are losing money. South Africa is now looking at how it can protect the market and consumers.
The one fundamental regulation that you're going to see there is that it should be seen as not a currency, but it should be allowed to work as if it were a currency. One other regulation is that these people must be registered. So the anonymity which is associated with crypto assets is going to be broken. On that side, I think it's good. We should all welcome. But the excessive nature of the regulation does worry me.
Most crypto service providers and traders have enjoyed operating unregulated in South Africa thus far, but the Reserve Bank is looking to get some regulation in place by the end of the first quarter of 2019.
It's clear that the authorities want to regulate it much more tighter over time, and a total ban may be possible, or at least an attempt to totally ban these so-called crypto assets as well is also something that could be considered over time.
Cryptocurrency exchange service provider Luno operates in over 40 countries. They set up shop in South Africa in 2013 and currently have 2.4 million users globally.
Regulators around the world have been fairly slow to form their opinions around cryptocurrency, specifically regulations, and that basically made banks around the world the de facto regulators, which made it very difficult for cryptocurrency service providers like Luno, like exchanges, to open bank accounts. The Reserve Bank's proposal is not to regulate cryptocurrency like Bitcoin itself, it's to regulate service providers. And I think that's a very positive move, as it will provide consumers and potential future consumers with the confidence that the service providers who they are dealing with will be able to find regulatory standards.
But some believe this is an attempt to have control over the crypto market. As the name suggests, digital currencies are produced by computers, therefore they are not owned or managed by government or countries.
We have a very strong financial markets and very strong financial institutions. We are absolutely ideally positioned to encourage the world's brightest people to use South Africa to develop this technology even further. But instead of doing that, I'm afraid we've got Big Brother, and Big Brother is going to stifle this new technology.
Public comment on the regulations closed Friday. The Reserve Bank is hoping to implement the new rules in the next few months. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
To Tunisia now, the state has increasingly continued to become a popular tourist destination for Chinese travelers. Tourism, which accounts for about 8% of Tunisia's GDP, is among one of the prioritized cooperation sectors between China and the North African nation. CGTN's Adnet Shawashi reports.
The Tunisian Federation of Hotels, FTH, has revealed that the number of Chinese tourists has increased by 400% in the North African state.
The evolution of the Chinese market is unprecedented. The Tunisian Federation of Hotels has visited China to develop new partnerships with Chinese tour operators who are interested in the Tunisian destination.
Experts added that many factors explain this phenomenon, like visa exemption for Chinese visitors.
Chinese visitors are exempt from visas. This has encouraged Chinese tourists to come to Tunisia. They come to discover the culture. They can see 4 landscapes in Tunisia in 6 hours: the mountain, the sea, the desert, and the historical sites.
Tourism professionals have urged the Tunisian government and the national carrier Tunisair to create more chartered and direct flights from Beijing to Tunis.
Improving air transport will boost tourism activity because tourists will be able to visit Tunisia without waiting hours at the European and Asian airports. The Chinese market has a huge potential that we can develop with our partners to increase revenues in foreign exchange.
Tourism is a vital sector which employs over 1 million professionals in Tunisia. Economists say the North African state can create more than 30,000 direct jobs in tourism in the coming years.
Tunisian tourism professionals have revealed that the number of Chinese tourists has tripled from 8,000 in 2015 to more than 24,000 in 2018. The Tunisian Tourism Ministry aims to attract 100,000 Chinese visitors in the next 3 years. Adnan Shawashi, CGTN, Tunis.
Senegal is going to the polls on the 24th of this month, and campaigns are in full swing. But as the presidential candidates hit the campaign trail hoping to garner votes with various policies, one voter is choosing development as a key concern. Here is the story of Yaya Nias, who is a barber in one of the salons situated just outside the capital, Dakar.
To the ordinary eye, Yaya Nias is just another struggling hairdresser, operating in one of these shacks in the back streets of Dakar. But Yaya is a traveled man. He grew up in France and knows a lot about politics and development.
I lived there. I lived in France. I am among people who have traveled abroad and then come back to the country and try to do something to make a living. I'll give you an example. In France, if one day you lost your job and you are unemployed, each end of the month you receive unemployment benefits. Now that doesn't exist in Africa. Healthcare and all that doesn't exist either.
As presidential candidates mount rallies in search of votes, Yaya is one of the disappointed voters. No leader seems to be addressing the fundamental issues close to his heart.
There are too many things to do. We are late in terms of development compared to other continents, and I think it shouldn't be that way. So what I expect from the next president, from the next African presidents, is that they work to really change things. Be in power for the people, help the people, because Africans are really tired. We just get by, we fight. Everyone tries to fight on their own, but I think countries really have the power to change things.
World Bank figures give Senegal a clean bill of health, thanks to a growth rate of around 7%. This has given incumbent President Macky Sall an edge above his closest rival, Ousmane Sonko. However, the unemployment rate in this West African nation remains high.
Senegal is really on a good path, and if we continue on that path, we'll be able to achieve something if everyone gets a share of the cake. Having just one group of Senegalese who live really well in comfort while all the rest suffer, that needs to stop.
President Macky Sall's government has heavily invested in infrastructure, a move that is aimed at decongesting the capital. To Yaya, this is good, but it's not good enough. He would like the political class to take a unique and creative angle in tackling problems affecting the nation, just like he does whenever he takes on his client's hair. Ucheo Korokwo, CGTN.
You're watching Global Business. Coming up after the break. UK MPs propose stiff regulations against Facebook to counter fake news. And tech giant Huawei worked with mobile carriers to construct the world's first indoor 5G network in China.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, two of the major cities I grew up in. Business in Africa is high. After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Ucheo Korokwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Let's have a look at the top stories of the day. Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari has issued a stern warning to potential vote riggers that they will face the full force of the law. The president's sentiments come amid preparations for rescheduled elections on Saturday. President Buhari has reiterated his commitment to ensure the rescheduled ballot proceeds without a hitch. Somalia authorities are assuring Kenya the disputed oil blocks it will not be auctioned. The blocks are in a disputed maritime region between both nations. This comes after Kenya recalled its ambassador and expelled the Somali envoy to Kenya. South Sudan, despite the signing of a peace deal, UN investigators have found that at least 175 women and girls have been raped or suffered other sexual and physical violence between September and December last year. The surge in conflict-related sexual violence is attributed to the breakdown in the rule of law, and a large number of fighters in the north are yet to be reintegrated after years of civil war. And 7 members of parliament from the UK's opposition Labour Party have quit in protest over Brexit and anti-Semitism. The mass resignation of the group is regarded as a major setback for the Labour opposition, which is struggling to pitch controversial policies to the public. And that's a look at our top stories. Members of Parliament in the UK say social media giant Facebook needs far stricter regulation with tough and urgent action necessary to curb fake news. The Digital Culture, Media and Sport Committee has concluded that the firm's founder Mark Zuckerberg failed to show leadership or personal responsibility and that untrue stories from foreign powers were risking the UK's democracy. The report called for a compulsory code of ethics for tech companies overseen by an independent regulator, and that the regulator be given powers to launch legal action if companies breach the code. It also recommended that tech companies operating in the UK be taxed to help fund the work for the Information Commissioner's Office and any new regulator set up to oversee them. Saudi Arabia has signed investment agreements with Pakistan worth $20 billion. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman witnessed the signing during the beginning of an Asian tour, which will include China. Pakistani President Arif Alvi hosted a banquet for Prince Mohammed, who also ordered the release of about 2,100 Pakistani prisoners from the kingdom's jails during his visit. The Crown Prince's visit marks a deepening of ties between allies whose relationship has in the past centered on oil-rich Saudi Arabia backing Pakistan's economy during difficult periods, and in return, Pakistan's powerful army lending support to Saudi Arabia and its royal family.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for honoring me, rewarding me the Pakistan's highest award, that is the Nishan-e-Pakistan.
In Pakistan too, it's a beautiful country. It's at the crossroads. There's a huge change. Our directions have been similar against corruption. Our directions have been similar for peace in the region. Our directions have been similar in developing both our countries.
Luxury German car maker Porsche has issued a warning to its customers of a potential price hike of up to 10% in case of a hard Brexit. The car maker said it had taken the precautionary step of informing its customers whose cars are due to be delivered after March 29th, the day Britain leaves the European Union. It still remains uncertain whether Britain will strike a deal with the EU by March 29th, and car manufacturers have joined other industries in calling for an urgent clarity on what the future trade relationship might look like. Chinese smartphone maker OnePlus is gaining market share in the US for what American users praise as high-quality devices. That comes despite some company turbulence, including OnePlus's admittance that the credit card data of about 40,000 of its clients was compromised when its website got hacked in November. CGTN's Karina Huber has this story from New York.
Kevin Jager knows a thing or two about tech. He is a cameraman and editor in New York who often shoots for CGTN. He says OnePlus phones have been one of the industry's best-kept secrets. He first became familiar with the Chinese brand in 2014 when he bought the OnePlus One.
Camera was great, battery life was great. It was a good phone. It was solidly built. For the price, I couldn't believe it.
The phones, which are roughly half the price of comparable iPhones and Samsung phones, are popular in China and other developing markets like India. But they only recently launched in the US, teaming up with cell phone provider T-Mobile for the 6T. Industry analyst Max Wolf says the phone has been well received.
They have a growing user base, and they're definitely moving off the shelves. The bigger question is whether they can become a brand or just a really good deal on a solid phone. And that's a TBD. We'll still sort of wait to see what happens there.
OnePlus phones are entering the U.S. market at a time of increased scrutiny of Chinese tech firms. U.S. citizens have been warned by intelligence agencies not to use phones by Huawei or ZTE. And both brands are no longer being sold on U.S. military bases over concerns about security.
OnePlus has faced no such resistance in the U.S. Wolf says that's because it is focused mainly on consumer phones. Huawei and ZTE are much bigger companies that sell networking equipment. But the company has had problems. This month, it admitted that its website got hacked in November. Roughly 40,000 of its customers' credit card data might have been compromised. It has also faced accusations of mining users' data without their consent. Jager says he isn't overly concerned about security, mainly because OnePlus's operating system is made by Google and the phone is distributed by T-Mobile.
All these big companies kind of back it, and I don't think they would get involved with a company that was doing something underhanded or that could leave you possibly at risk to security issues.
Karina Huber, CGTN, New York.
Some of China's leading economists are calling for increased government efforts in rebuilding confidence in the country's markets. They say that efforts should include improving efficiency and reducing red tape in the public sector amidst ongoing pressure on the Chinese economy.
Government officials and experts gathered at the Chinese Economists 50 Forum in Beijing over the weekend to offer advice on what could be done to help the economy. An expert from the State Council said the government could help by expanding investment in advanced infrastructure. That includes 5G, industrial internet services, and other high-tech sectors. Wang Yiming also warned that the government shouldn't do it alone.
In order to avoid the crowding out effect of investment, the government should mobilize the market capital to a greater extent. But how to encourage market investment? I would say we should accelerate reforms and build the confidence of market participants.
A number of experts also offered opinions on what more the government could do to help the economy. Many of them said improving efficiency and reducing red tape involved in public services would be key. That includes safeguarding the market order.
We should thoroughly clean up and reform the way in which the government manages industries and enterprises. In the past, our government formulated plans, set targets, published lists and issued notices. But now the government should change its role to an establisher and protector of a platform for fair market competition.
Experts say that those kinds of reforms will also help reduce fiscal costs. A member of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences said at the forum that the goal of proactive fiscal policy is to maximize its positive effects while minimizing the negative impact. He said that the best way to maintain a fiscal balance is to reduce administrative spending and expenditures irrelevant to people's livelihoods.
Getting something new is a tradition during the Chinese New Year, and for some companies, that means new logos. Meijia takes a look at the reasons behind the changes.
Fashion retail brand Zara announced a new logo at the end of January, its third generation and following a previous update 8 years ago. It still uses a serif typeface, but the letters are now thinner, taller, and closer together. Zara is just the latest in a recent flurry of brand logo changes. Other big names with the new look include Burberry, Celine, Bauman, and Dior. Some of the new looks remain similar to the older ones, just losing originally complicated designs and updating to a more modern and simple font. One industry observer says these kind of changes convey one clear message. The brands are trying to communicate with younger customers.
If the brand itself, like the positioning and the strategy have to change, so they have to change the logo like accordingly. There are so many elements influencing the brands, like globalization, younger consumers, and appreciation of aesthetics. Nowadays, the younger consumer is influencing the fashion industrial and luxury brands like a lot. And it's also this more flat expressions is like encouraging the young consumers to express themselves.
Wu says designing a new logo can be costly, and it's difficult to measure the success of the change. Sales performance can be one metric. Balenciaga changed its logo in 2017, and the brand reported the fastest growth within its parent company Kering Group in the second half of that year. Burberry reported a 2% drop in retail revenue for its latest quarter ending in December, and the company attributed the performance to its repositioning strategy. Sometimes the results can be dramatic. Apparel brand Gap changed its logo back in 2010 from its navy blue design to a more modern style. But the new logo got so many complaints online that the company was forced to drop it just 11 days after the release. Experts say that changing a logo can be a risky move for any company.
A
change of logo actually impacts the recognition of people who are already the brand's customers.
And they're the people that are likely to be the ones now paying for the brands. If they don't like the logo, they will leave the brand.
But that still doesn't stop companies from trying out new logos. And it's not only international brands doing it. More than 100 Chinese firms are estimated to have changed their logos last year, including companies in the internet, automobile, apparel, and media sectors. Mi Jiayi, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
Tech giant Huawei is working with mobile carriers to construct indoor 5G networks at one of China's major railway terminals, the Shanghai Hongqiao railway station. This cooperation is the global debut of Huawei's 5G digital indoor system, making the station the world's first to be built upon a 5G system. With the details, here's CGTN's Han Peng.
Welcome to the world's first train station equipped with 5G technology. If you want to watch a high-resolution movie, you should probably come here. With the super-fast 5G Wi-Fi, you can now download a 2 GB high-definition movie in less than 20 seconds. This can happen on each passenger's mobile phone in a crowded station. The number of passengers can reach 300,000 in a day. The high density of people often causes data congestion, making it slow even to load a video online in a 4G era. Now, this small box is a 5G base station designed by Huawei. Its internet speed can reach a staggering 1.6 gigabytes per second. And Huawei's 5G technology is not only meant for Wi-Fi.
Today, these robotics are connecting by 5G technologies with low latency and a much wider bandwidth. 你好。
您好，有什么需要为您服务吗？
我可以要一瓶可乐吗？
好的，我即刻帮您下单，稍后会有送餐机器人送餐过来。
The faster internet speed makes positioning and navigation much more accurate, so this robot can locate exactly where I am.
您好，2号桌号桌的可乐到了，请在取餐后摸一下我的手。
Without sending my Coke to the people around me. By September, the Hongqiao station will be fully covered with the 5G system. Huawei says the devices we tried today are just the tip of the iceberg.
The 4G change people's life, and definitely 5G will change the society, which means using 5G technologies to connect everything, to connect robotics, to connect cars, and therefore to make a full digitalized, full intelligent world.
Plugging 5G into the Hongqiao station is a major step towards commercial use of 5G technology in China, which is aimed to be completed in 2020. Han Peng, CGTN, Shanghai.
Let's look at the commodities market. And Brent crude oil eased today but remained on track for its strongest first quarter in 8 years, thanks to a growing belief among investors that OPEC supply cuts will prevent a build-up in unused fuel. Oil has risen nearly 25% so far this year and is on course for its strongest first quarter performance since 2011, thanks largely to a commitment by the OPEC and allies to cut output. Still ahead on Global Business. A Ghanaian university student creates unique furniture from old tires. We head now to Ghana, where we meet a student who is giving discarded old tires a lease of life. Using fabric, glass and colored materials, Jeffrey Yeboah is not just earning a living from his unique creations, but also creating employment for other young people. Here's the story.
Agile hands and a firm sight on the final product,
This is what Jeffrey Yaboy relishes in his quest to create unique designs for his clients. Yaboy uses old discarded tires, which he collects from the dump site,